The chilling discovery. The first thing Maya notices when she wakes up isn't the time, it's the silence. A deep, unnatural quiet, like the apartment itself is holding its breath. She turns over and jolts. Ethan is sitting at the edge of the bed, completely still, staring at her. Her heart stutters. "Babe, what are you doing?" He doesn't answer right away. His head tilts slightly like he's studying her. Then, in a voice too calm, too controlled, he asks, "How did you sleep?" The weight of his stare makes her stomach knot. Something about his expression is off. Not angry, not sad, just unreadable. Maya forces a nervous laugh. Fine. Why?" Ethan stands up slowly, the dim light catching something in his hand, her phone. She sits up. "Hey, why do you have—" He tosses it onto the bed beside her. The screen is already on. The hotel confirmation email is open. The hotel where she met Ryan. Her breath catches. Ethan just watches, silent, waiting. The realization hits her all at once. He knows. The relationship setup, a perfect lie. A week earlier, Maya would have told anyone she was in a perfect relationship. Ethan was the kind of boyfriend people envied. Attentive, patient, and quietly intelligent. He wasn't the loud, charming type, but he had this way of making people feel small without ever raising his voice. A subtle authority. Even in moments of affection, there was always an unsettling precision to the way he did things, like he was playing a game only he understood. Maya didn't mind. If anything, she liked the stability he provided. Ethan never lost his temper, never raised his voice, never even seemed jealous. Almost too in control. But in the past few months, something had shifted. She felt watched. It was nothing obvious, just little things. Like the way Ethan's eyes would linger on her a second too long after she came home late. The way he'd ask seemingly innocent questions. "Who were you with? How was your night?" But something about his tone made her feel like he already knew the answer. She told herself she was imagining it. Then there was his memory. Ethan remembered everything. If she mentioned a coworker in passing, he'd recall their name weeks later. If she slightly changed her perfume, he'd notice instantly. "You're so observant," she once teased. "I swear you'd make a great detective." Ethan had just smiled. "I like paying attention to things other people miss." At the time, she thought it was sweet. Now she wonders if it was a warning. The first hint of control. One evening, Maya was getting ready for a night out with friends. She slipped on a black dress, a little too tight, a little too short. When she walked into the living room, Ethan glanced up from his laptop. His face didn't change, but he put his work aside. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Out with Emily and them," she said casually, adjusting her earrings. He nodded slowly. "That's the dress you're wearing?" She paused, suddenly self-conscious. "Yeah, why?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "No reason. You look nice." The way he said it made her stomach twist, like he was saying more than his words let on. Still, he didn't stop her from going. He never stopped her. But when she came home that night, her phone was moved. Just slightly. Just enough to make her wonder if it had been touched. She convinced herself she was imagining it. But she wasn't, because Ethan had already seen everything, and he was waiting. The affair, a dangerous escape. Maya never planned to cheat. At least that's what she told herself. It started as harmless flirtation, a way to remind herself that she was still desirable, still exciting, still in control. Ethan was steady, predictable, and sometimes that steadiness felt like a weight pressing down on her. Ryan, on the other hand, was the opposite of predictable. They met at the Ember Lounge, a rooftop bar in downtown Chicago. She had gone out for drinks with Emily and a few coworkers. It was supposed to be just a girls' night, but then Ryan Hale caught her eye behind the bar. Tall, confident, with an easy grin and the kind of charm that felt effortless. He didn't just make drinks, he performed. The way he spun a bottle before pouring, the way he winked at customers, the way he leaned in just enough to make her feel like the most important person in the room. When he slid her an old-fashioned, a drink she didn't order, she raised an eyebrow. "On the house," he said smoothly. "Saw you looking at the menu. Figured you were about to ask for it." She smirked. "You figured right." "See, I'm good at reading people." His grin widened. "So what do I need to read to get your number?" She laughed. It was stupid. It was reckless. But for the first time in months, she felt excited. The decision to cross the line. It didn't happen that night, or the next, but the text started. Late night conversations that turned from casual to flirty to something dangerous. At first, she told herself it was innocent, a little fun, nothing serious, nothing Ethan had to know about. But Ryan didn't just flirt, he made her feel seen. Ethan noticed details, but Ryan noticed her. The way she twisted her ring when she was nervous, the way she hesitated before answering personal questions, the way she seemed trapped in a life she didn't fully want. "Tell me something," Ryan texted one night. "When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" She stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Tomorrow." The Augustine Hotel was discreet, upscale, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Maya checked in under a different name. It felt like a game, a secret adventure. Ryan was already waiting in the room, lounging on the bed like he belonged there. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he teased. "Neither did I." He pulled her toward him. The last logical thought she had was that for the first time in years, she felt free. What she didn't know was that she wasn't free at all. Because across the street, sitting in his parked car, Ethan was watching. The discovery, a psychopath's patience. Ethan always knew something was off. It wasn't one big mistake that gave her away. It was a series of small ones. The way she checked her phone more often, but tilted it away from him. The way she suddenly started wearing perfume before girls' nights when she never used to. The way she came home one night, stepped into the apartment, and hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Maya thought she was being careful, but Ethan was always watching. The first clue, the credit card statement. It started with a charge. Ethan handled most of their finances, so he saw the bank statements before Maya even thought to check them. Augustine Hotel, $327. She hadn't mentioned a work event, a business trip, or a friend visiting. There was no reason for her to be at a hotel. Ethan could have confronted her right then. Instead, he smiled to himself and let it go. For now, the second clue, the phone password. Maya never used to keep her phone locked around him. She would casually leave it on the counter, open and accessible, until 2 weeks ago. Now, every time she left the room, her screen was dark, secure. She changed her passcode, twice. That made him laugh. Not out of anger, not even out of pain, just amusement. Did she really think a 6-digit code could keep him out? One night, while she slept beside him, he picked up her phone and simply held it up to her face. The screen unlocked instantly, and there it was. The texts, the calls, the confirmation email for the Augustine. Ethan placed the phone back where it was, careful not to disturb her. Knowing was more important than confronting, because now he had time to plan. The final clue, the hotel surveillance. Ethan wasn't content with just digital evidence. No, he wanted to see it. A single call to the Augustine's reception desk, pretending to be a forgetful guest who lost his company card, was enough to get the front desk to confirm a reservation under Maya's fake name. The next step, the hotel's security footage. This part was easy. A coworker owed him a favor. Ethan didn't even have to explain why he needed access to the hotel's exterior cameras. People gave him things when he asked in the right way. And just like that, he had what he needed. There was Maya, stepping out of a cab, checking in under an alias. And then Ryan. Ethan watched, his face unreadable, as the cameras captured it all. Ryan arriving at the hotel, Ryan at the front desk, Ryan walking into the elevator alone. Ethan checked the timestamp, 9:42 p.m. Ryan wouldn't leave until 2:17 a.m. Ethan let out a slow breath, cold, controlled, calculated. Then he closed the laptop and stared at the blank screen for a long time. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sad. He was just ready. The revenge, a psychopath's masterpiece. Ethan didn't want revenge in the way most people did. He didn't want to yell or cry or beg for an explanation. He wanted control. Total, unshakable, inescapable control. And Maya had just given him the perfect opportunity to take it. The first move, the perfect trap. Ethan knew that confrontation would be messy. People made mistakes when they acted impulsively, and he didn't make mistakes. So he waited 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, he kissed her goodnight. He told her he loved her. He made her feel safe, made her believe she had gotten away with it. And when she finally started to relax, when she stopped checking over her shoulder, stopped being so careful, that's when he started pulling the strings. It started with Ryan. Ryan's world falls apart. Ryan never saw Ethan coming. One by one, things in his life started going wrong. Small things at first. A bar inspection, one he failed because of anonymous complaints about expired liquor. A credit card flagged for fraud, locking him out of his bank account for several days. His landlord suddenly deciding to evict him, citing violations he couldn't remember making. Ryan was the kind of guy who thrived on confidence, on feeling untouchable. Ethan made sure to take that away from him. And then one night, Ryan received an email, an anonymous sender, a subject line that just read, "I know." Attached was a single photo, a grainy black and white still from the hotel surveillance camera, a picture of him walking into the Augustine. Alone. Ryan froze. Another email followed. "She didn't tell you about me, did she?" Maya's reality begins to crack. While Ryan's life was unraveling, Ethan turned his attention back to Maya. He didn't need to do much, just nudge her in the right direction. It started with misplaced objects. Her keys weren't where she left them. Her phone settings were changed. A document on her laptop was open that she swore she hadn't touched. "Babe, did you move my stuff?" she asked one morning, frowning. Ethan just smiled. "You probably forgot where you put it." Her text with Ryan, gone. Deleted from her phone without a trace. Her calls, silenced. At first, she thought Ryan was ignoring her. Then she tried calling from Emily's phone. This number is no longer in service. Maya's stomach dropped. That night, when she got home, Ethan was already there, sitting at the dining table, fingers tapping lazily against his whiskey glass. "Long day?" he asked, voice smooth. She hesitated. "Yeah." She stood in the doorway for a long second, heart pounding. He looked so calm, too calm. And then he tilted his head, eyes locked onto hers, and said the words that sent ice through her veins. "I know." Breakdown, nowhere to run. Maya couldn't breathe. Her hands felt cold, her throat dry, but she forced herself to stay still. If Ethan knew, if he really knew, then why was he just sitting there? She swallowed hard. "Know what?" Ethan let out a quiet chuckle, tilting his whiskey glass just enough for the amber liquid to swirl. The dim kitchen light flickered overhead. "You tell me." His voice was smooth, too smooth, her pulse pounded. Her mind raced through 100 possible answers. Deny everything? Pretend she didn't know what he was talking about? Laugh it off? But before she could speak, Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. The screen was already playing a video, a black and white clip from a security camera, the Augustine Hotel, a timestamp, and then her, checking in, nervous but excited, looking over her shoulder. Then Ryan, walking in just minutes later. Maya felt her stomach lurch. This is a dream. This has to be a dream. Ethan was watching her carefully now, his eyes dark and unblinking. "You know what's funny?" His voice was calm, almost conversational. "You thought you were being so careful." Maya's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I've been watching you for weeks, Maya. Watching you lie to my face. Watching you leave at night thinking I wouldn't notice. Watching you text him." He nodded toward the phone. "Though you might have noticed, those messages aren't there anymore." Maya's blood ran cold. She scrambled for her phone, unlocking it with shaky hands. She scrolled. Nothing. The texts, the calls, gone. Her hands started trembling. "What did you do?" Ethan exhaled, shaking his head like he was disappointed. "Maya, sweetheart." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His grip was firm. Too firm. "I didn't do anything." He smiled. "Not yet." Ryan's last warning. That night, Maya locked herself in the bathroom, hands shaking as she fumbled to call Ryan from a new number. He picked up, but his voice wasn't the same. "Maya, listen to me," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. "Whatever you do, don't go home." Her breath hitched. "What?" "You don't understand." Ryan's voice was urgent now. Panicked. "This guy, he's not normal. He's not." The line went dead. Maya pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen. Call failed. She tried again, straight to voicemail. A chill crept down her spine. Ryan was afraid. Not just worried, not just cautious, terrified. And for the first time since this whole thing started, so was she. She turned toward the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Her breath caught in her throat. Her phone screen was on. A new text message. "Ethan, come to bed, sweetheart." The descent, the illusion of escape. Maya didn't think she could feel more trapped. Then she did. The walls of Ethan's apartment, which once felt comforting and familiar, now seemed to close in around her. The silence in the house was oppressive, thick like a fog. She tried to stand up, her legs shaky, but every time she moved, she felt Ethan's eyes on her, never blinking, always watching. She knew what he was capable of now. The patience he had shown, the way he'd orchestrated everything, calculated every move, every word. He hadn't lashed out in anger. He didn't need to. Ethan was the storm in the distance, calm on the outside, but inside, everything was waiting to implode. The first attempt, the escape plan. Maya spent the next few hours pretending. She made dinner, fed the dog, and played the part of the loving girlfriend. Her heart was racing, her hands trembling every time Ethan wasn't looking. She was searching, trying to find some way out. Her first attempt was subtle, the first sign of weakness from Ethan. She knew she had to act fast. Maya excused herself to use the bathroom, but instead, she crept to the front door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. Could she make it? Could she really run before Ethan knew? But just as her fingers brushed the handle, a voice called out from behind her. "Don't bother." She froze. The coldness of Ethan's tone made her stomach turn. When she turned around, he was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his arms folded across his chest. His expression was unreadable. What do you mean?" she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. "I said don't bother, Maya." He took a slow step toward her. "Do you think I'd let you leave knowing what I know?" His voice was almost casual, but it hit her like a blow. His next words made her blood run cold. "I've disabled the car. There's no way out of here." The game begins, her heart in her throat. Maya's breath hitched. Ethan had planned for this moment. Every exit, every escape route had been blocked. The car was in the garage door remote nowhere to be found. She'd never even thought to check her phone for tracking apps, but Ethan had. Ethan casually walked over to the kitchen counter, picking up a knife. He didn't even hold it threateningly, just casually, like he was preparing to cut vegetables. But it was the way he looked at her while doing it that made her skin crawl. "You think you can just leave me, Maya? After everything we've shared? After all the years of building this life?" His voice lowered, becoming cold and dark. "No, I'm not finished yet." Her hands were slick with sweat as she stood frozen, not knowing if she should run or talk her way out. The second attempt? Maya knew she couldn't just sit there at his mercy. She had to try again. Her only hope now was Ryan, the man she'd once sought out for excitement and distraction. She needed him to save her, to get her out of this hell before it was too late. She reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking as she quickly typed a message to Ryan, praying it would go through. "Ethan knows. I'm scared. Help me." She hit send, holding her breath as she waited for a reply. Seconds passed, then minutes. Nothing. Her phone buzzed, but it wasn't Ryan, it was Ethan. "Did you think I wouldn't check your phone? Did you think I wouldn't see what you sent him?" Maya dropped her phone as if it had burned her. He'd known about the message before she even read it. Ethan was everywhere. Every step she took, every breath she drew, he had already anticipated it. The final realization, trapped in plain sight. By now, Maya was too exhausted to fight back. Her mind raced with every possible outcome, but nothing made sense anymore. Ethan's control over her was too complete. She couldn't run. She couldn't escape. And then, as if he could read her thoughts, Ethan spoke again. "You're starting to understand, aren't you, Maya? You're starting to realize what you did was the beginning of the end." His words were calm, but they made her skin crawl. This wasn't about her cheating. This was about Ethan breaking her down, piece by piece, until she had nowhere to go but him. Maya finally collapsed, her body giving in to exhaustion and fear. The emotional weight was too much. She had no one to turn to, no one to help her, and now it was too late. Ethan stepped toward her, crouching down to meet her gaze. "There's nowhere to run. You'll never leave me again." The final showdown, Ethan's game comes to an end. Maya had no idea how long she had been locked in Ethan's apartment. Days? Weeks? She had lost track of time. The once carefully curated life she had built for herself had disintegrated, and now all that remained was a constant, gnawing fear that Ethan would never let her go. She had tried to reason with him, begged him to understand, to stop, but with every tear she shed, every word she whispered, it only seemed to fuel the fire in his eyes. He was playing a game, and she was his pawn. The moment of clarity, breaking point. It was late one night, the apartment silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Maya sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands, trying to block out the thoughts racing through her mind. The weight of her situation was suffocating, and the thought of living in this prison, of being constantly watched, was driving her to the edge. But there was a spark inside her, the tiny part of her that refused to give up. She wasn't the person she used to be, the confident, carefree woman who'd once taken everything for granted. But maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim a part of herself. Maybe she could break free. Maya stared at her phone, which had been her lifeline, even if it had been under Ethan's control. She knew Ethan was always watching her. He'd always been watching her. But the thought of Ryan brought back a flicker of hope. Was he still out there? Was he still alive? She hadn't heard from him since that last desperate phone call. The unexpected ally, Ryan's message. Suddenly, the phone buzzed. Maya jumped. For a moment, she thought it was Ethan. He had been so meticulous in monitoring her every move, so careful to keep her isolated. But this time, when she glanced at the screen, she saw Ryan's name. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the phone. A single message. Ryan, I know you're trapped. Ethan's too smart for me, but I'm getting out of here. He's watching. Be careful. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Ryan was alive. She wasn't alone. There was still someone who could help her. But the message was cryptic, and it carried an underlying warning. Ethan knew everything. Ryan was warning her to stay quiet, to stay hidden, and she had no idea how she could communicate without Ethan finding out. The game had gone too far, and now Maya knew she wasn't just a pawn. She was part of a twisted puzzle Ethan had built. The confrontation, Maya's last stand. In a sudden burst of resolve, Maya turned off her phone and stood up, pacing the room. The walls felt like they were closing in on her again, but this time, there was something different. She wasn't waiting for someone to rescue her. She was taking control. Her mind raced through the options. Ethan was always watching, always listening. He was meticulous, always several steps ahead. But there had to be a crack in his plan. A weakness. As if on cue, Ethan walked into the room, his presence like a dark shadow casting itself over her. His expression was calm, but there was something behind his eyes, a hunger, a predatory glint that made her blood run cold. Maya, he said, his voice low, you're making it difficult for both of us. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for her face. His touch was cold, but it sent a wave of anger through her. She pulled away, her eyes flashing. You don't control me anymore, Ethan. You might think you've won, but you're wrong. I'm done. His face darkened. You don't get to say when this ends, Maya. I decide. Without thinking, Maya grabbed the nearest object, a glass vase on the coffee table, and hurled it at Ethan. It shattered against the wall beside him, sending shards of glass flying. For a moment, they both froze. The tension was thick, like the calm before a storm. Ethan's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in days, Maya felt like she had the upper hand. You really think you can fight me? Ethan's voice was colder now, more dangerous. You're nothing without me. You're lost. The final twist, Ethan's last play. Maya's heart pounded as she backed away from Ethan, but something in her snapped. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was furious. The thought of him manipulating her, of him controlling every part of her life, made her sick. She didn't even think. She just acted. Without warning, she grabbed her phone again and dialed the police. She couldn't escape on her own, but she could expose him. When Ethan realized what she was doing, his eyes flared with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist in a vice-like grip, but Maya pulled away, struggling against his hold. You think they're going to believe you? He hissed, his breath hot against her face. I'll destroy everything you've ever known. But the doorbell rang, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya saw a glimmer of hope. It was the police. Maya's heart raced as she pushed herself towards the door, breaking free from Ethan's grip. He lunged at her one final time, but it was too late. The officers were already inside, their guns drawn. The aftermath, a new beginning. Ethan was arrested, his once perfect facade crumbling as the truth came out. Maya's life was shattered, but she was finally free. The control Ethan had over her life had come to an end, but the scars would remain, both physical and psychological. As she walked out of the apartment, handcuffed in the back of the squad car, Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "You'll never be free, Maya. I'll always find you." She didn't know if that was true. She didn't know if she could ever escape the memory of him. But for the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The aftermath. A new life, a haunting future. Maya stood outside the courtroom, the weight of the past few months finally catching up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the ordeal was now dissipating, and in its place came a hollow exhaustion. She was free, but that freedom came at a cost. The scars left by Ethan weren't just physical, they were etched deep into her soul. The legal battle, exposing the monster. After Ethan's arrest, Maya had been thrust into a whirlwind of police reports, interviews, and courtroom battles. The shock of what had happened to her, what Ethan had done, was overwhelming. Every detail had to be relived, every moment examined, dissected like some kind of gruesome story. The prosecutor had worked tirelessly, building a case that painted Ethan as a manipulative psychopath. But Maya knew the truth. Ethan wasn't just a monster in the shadows. He had been a master of control, a puppeteer who manipulated everything around her for his own twisted pleasure. The defense tried to argue that Ethan was a victim of circumstance, that his upbringing had shaped him into the person he was. But the evidence was overwhelming. There were witnesses who had seen his behavior firsthand, his stalking, his manipulations. He was guilty, but Maya still had to testify. And every word she spoke felt like a dagger to her chest, reopening wounds she hadn't even realized were still raw. The court proceedings felt like an endless cycle of questioning her every action. Did she really think she could escape? Had she really been in danger all along? Was she to blame in some way for the things that happened? It was only after the trial, when Ethan was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, that the reality of it all began to set in. He would never hurt her again. A new beginning, reclaiming herself. It was a relief to know that Ethan was behind bars, but Maya couldn't escape the constant feeling of dread that seemed to follow her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. The apartment she had shared with him now felt like a tomb, a place where her memories of fear and torment had taken root. She moved out, leaving the space behind. She moved to a new city, a fresh start. Her friends, those who had been there for her during the darkest moments, helped her find a new place to live, one that felt like a sanctuary. It was small, but it was hers. Every day felt like a battle. Every noise outside her door made her jump. Every unexpected phone call made her heart race. She was constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But over time, the terror began to fade. Slowly, the haunting, the lingering fear. Months passed. Maya started to rebuild her life. She went back to school, got a new job. She even started to date again, though it was difficult. Every date, every new person she met felt like a test. Could she trust them? Would they hurt her like Ethan had? The doubts lingered, creeping into her mind when she least expected it. Maya still hadn't fully processed the psychological damage that had been done to her. It wasn't just the physical threats or the manipulation, it was the mental warfare, the way Ethan had controlled her every thought. She was always on edge, always second-guessing herself. And then one night, as she sat alone in her new apartment, something happened that nearly sent her back to square one. Her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You thought you could escape? I'll find you, Maya. I always do." Her heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Ethan. The revelation, not everything was over. Maya didn't sleep that night. She spent hours trying to figure out how he'd gotten her new number, how he could have known where she was. Had he been watching her the whole time? But something felt off about the message. It didn't feel like Ethan. The syntax wasn't quite right, and the way the message was phrased, it almost felt like a copycat. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker lurking behind it. Was someone else playing games with her? Was it really him? Or was it someone who had been watching the whole time, learning from Ethan's tactics? The uncertainty made her blood run cold. Ethan had always been methodical. He'd been watching her, controlling her, and now it seemed like his influence had spread beyond prison walls. But how? Maya wasn't sure what to do. Should she go to the police again? Should she leave everything behind and run? The fear, the uncertainty, it was suffocating. But one thing was clear, the past was never truly over. Ethan had left a mark on her that would never fade completely. The trauma, the manipulation, the control, it all ran too deep. The final choice moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Maya took control of the situation once again. She filed another report with the police, giving them the details of the threatening message. It wasn't much to go on, but she was determined to take back her life, no matter how much fear lingered in the corners of her mind. But instead of letting the terror rule her, she began taking small steps toward reclaiming her power. She didn't let the fear consume her. She kept moving forward, surrounded by people who cared for her. Slowly, the darkness that had once seemed all-encompassing began to feel more manageable. She realized that despite everything Ethan had put her through, she wasn't the same person she had been. She had survived. And that, she realized, was the greatest power she could ever hold.